This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.
Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. While the nation was preoccupied with red states and blue states this week, locally, the black and gold drew plenty attention. In both cases, there will be changes at the top. We'll look at these stories as well as an update on infrastructure improvements and at how the legislature is taking on tax reform. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter, Jeff Duncan, sports columnist, the Times-Picayune, NOLA.com, and sports analyst for WVUE-TV Fox 8, and Robert Collins, political analyst for WVUE-TV Fox 8 and columnist for Verité News. And we will stick with Robert because we had a big election this week, kind of surprised some people.
We did. And, you know, one thing about this election and about every presidential election is that we always look for sort of grand mandates because, of course, those of us that have to write about it as political analysts makes for better stories and better narratives for us. But the reality is we don't really have any grand mandates anymore in presidential elections. You know, a mandate's like a 60-40 election. We haven't had a 60-40 election since Ronald Reagan in 1984. What we have these days is, you know, we have a 50-50 country, and in every presidential election, the presidency is decided by about 3% of the population, like 3 people out of 100, that switches one way or the other. Even within the swing states, it's about 3% of the voters that switch one way or another. Joe Biden won with 51% of the vote 4 years ago. Donald Trump is, when all the final numbers come in, looks like he's going to win with about 51% of the vote. So that's what our presidents win well. You know, the modern presidency is like a 51% presidency. So that's, you know, so it's we're still a 50-50 country. Number two. I think all the analysis I'm seeing is really focusing on the racial elements and the gender elements. Like we know that President Trump did a lot better with black males. Basically, you know, doubled his from about 10% to about 21% this time with black males. He did better with Latino voters from the mid 30s to the mid 40s. Gained double digits there. So he did do well breaking a few percentage points from traditional Democratic constituencies, but I don't think that's the real story. I think the real story is turnout amongst the Democratic base. So if you look at the actual numbers, in 2020, Joe Biden got 81 million votes. Donald Trump got about 74 million. We look at the numbers now, and you know, some votes still have to be counted in California and big states like that, but about 94% of the votes have already been counted. And right now, Donald Trump has maintained his base. He has about 74 million. He might end up with 75 million. Right now, Harris has about 69 million. Now, she might gain another million or two in California, something like that. But we know she's not going to get anywhere near the 81 million that Joe Biden got. And to be clear, you know, where did those people go? Well, we know that they didn't go over to Trump because those numbers are not showing up in Trump's totals. So millions of people simply stayed at home and chose not to vote. And that's the Democratic base. And so I think the real issue here. Oh, and just overall turnout. You know, we thought this was going to break all records with high turnout election. The early vote was really high, but really, it's looking like in 2020 turnout was about 67%. The latest estimates we're getting now, it's looking like turnout's gonna nationwide is gonna be about 62%. So we had about a 5% drop off in turnout. So I think the bottom line here is that Trump held on to his base. He held on to his constituency. Harris did not hold on to the Biden base. A lot of Biden voters just stayed at home.
Let me suggest that I know people are wondering about the decline in voting. in past elections, there was never as much emphasis on swing states. Now, the last one they were, but over time there hasn't. And I think that's becoming a factor because you hear about, well, the 6 swing states, and if you don't live in one of the swing states, well, why do I need to go vote, okay? Or in the case of Louisiana, where we're not a swing state, but we know it was already decided for the Republicans, there's less incentive now to go out and vote on Election Day.
And interestingly enough, turnout was actually lower in Louisiana. In 2020, it was 70%. I just checked the Secretary of State's numbers today. It looks like it's going to be about 66. It's going to come in at about 66%. So even in Louisiana, we saw a drop off. Now, interestingly enough, Donald Trump's numbers actually went up a little bit. He got 58% of the vote 4 years ago. He got 60% this time. My theory is because the Trump people, they knew they were going to win the state, so they decided to run up the score. So basically they were kind of running up the score in Louisiana. And of course the Harris voters were suppressed because they knew that they had no shot at winning the race. So no, I think that's a valid point, Errol. I think a lot of people in the non-swing states, they say, well, we already know if we're a red state, we know it's going to go for Trump. We're a blue state, we know it's going to go for Harris. So that suppresses votes because people literally don't think their votes matter. And then the candidates, it's not just all the media attention that's on the swing states. The candidates spend all their time in those 5 to 7 swing states, and so because of that, you don't really see the candidate in your home state, and so you just don't get excited about it, and so you figure why turn out to vote. So yeah, it's an issue that we have to wrestle with as a country.
And certainly the focus is always on the Electoral College because that ultimately decides who's going to be the president. But this go around, of course, Electoral College vote still matters, but popular vote also went with Trump this time. Sure.
So this will be the first time that Trump's ever carried the popular vote, and I think that's a function of like Errol said, the numbers being suppressed in those high population areas where Harris normally would have done better in the popular vote, California, her home state, New York, et cetera. But I do think just it's really just a function of even in the swing states, her people just did not show up. But now again, it's still close. I mean, like I said, that 3% that switches in every election, that's true in the swing states. True. The swing states, no one wins any mandates in the swing states. The swing states are still close, within about 3 percentage points either way. But the Harris voters, the Biden voters did not show up in sufficient numbers for Harris. I think that, and so I think the Democratic Party is going to have to do some soul searching. Why did this? You had a candidate that won last time. His own vice president could not hold on to the party's
and then
base.
Really quickly, Congress. Where do we stand now?
We know the Republicans have seized control of the Senate. They have at least 52 votes right now. They could gain a couple more. We're still waiting on some results from out west. But we do know for sure did I say the Democrats? I meant to say the Republicans.
The Republicans
of
the Senate.
So the Republicans have control of the U.S. Senate, and right now it does look like the Republicans are also going to retain control of the U.S. House. We're waiting on some results right now from California. So right now it does appear that the Republicans will have the trifecta. They will have the White House, the U.S. Senate, and the U.S. House. So they have total government control. So as we've seen in previous years, when you have total government control, when you control all three, you have to produce, and you have to produce fairly quickly. Otherwise, the midterms come around, and the American people will punish you for that.
When will those votes come in? When do we anticipate those votes from California?
Within the next day or two. I mean, California is kind of ridiculous in how long it takes them to count. Sometimes it takes them, literally weeks. But we do expect they have improved their counting procedures. So we do expect to have a final call on the U.S. House of Representatives within the next 24, 48 hours.
All righty. All right, E, thanks a lot, Robert. You wanted to talk about some key elections in Louisiana.
Yeah, and some of the local ballot activity. Well, here's the scoop. In Orleans Parish, there were 2 women on ballots who were both elected officials, and they were both named Harris, okay? And one of them, of course, was Kamala, and they both won big, okay? at least in Orleans Parish. She had 82% of the vote in Orleans Parish. Didn't do so well with the rest of the nation. But the other, and really kind of like the important local story, is Leslie Harris, who's a council member who was really the force behind this charter amendment to set up a trust fund for housing. And that won big, too. It won like with 72% of the vote. So it was a very impressive win. And the fact that it didn't have new taxes attached to it, I think helped. But anyway, and so it's a good night for the Harrises, at least in Orleans Parish. Otherwise, in Orleans Parish, there were 2 school board elections that go into runoffs. Anything that was an amendment or as is the case with the Housing Trust Fund or a constitutional amendment passed, everything passed. I think the voters just wanted to vote for president and said, okay, I'll vote for the same thing in Jefferson Parish. Any sort of referendums and things all passed, and so the voting went pretty easy. By the way, just to show that, I mean, we've known this all along, but the difference between an urban parish and a suburban parish side by side is where Kamala Harris got 82% of the vote in Orleans Parish. In Jefferson Parish, she had 42%. And Trump won in Jefferson with 55% and had 15% in New Orleans. So,
and Robert, Louisiana turnout compared to the country, what was that like?
So Louisiana turnout was 66%, but 4 years ago, Louisiana turnout was 70%. So turnout's still out in Louisiana. So we are higher than the rest of the country, but we're below what we were in 2020. So there was a drop off.
It helped. I don't remember 4 years ago, but if you have like a contested congressional race on the ballot, that helps.
Some
states have a governor's election on the ballot, and that really helped turnout.
Yeah.
We didn't have any high profile elections at all.
No. The only thing we had is in Baton Rouge there was a hot mayor's race. For Baton Rouge mayor. I'm not aware of anything else in the state of Louisiana that was a hot race.
Okay, all right. So that election down, but other ones are right around the corner, and we'll see what the next Trump era will bring.
Yes.
All right, thanks a lot. All right, another big story today in the news this week, Saints.
Yeah, tough day out on Airline Drive at the Saints facility this week. Dennis Allen relieved of his duties as head coach, fired basically. After his third, really 8 games into his third season. I think very disappointing for Gail Benson, for Mickey Loomis, the general manager. Dennis Allen was the hand-picked successor to Sean Payton. This was someone that they very much supported loyally along the way, gave him really every resource, I think, to be successful. And ultimately, he failed. I mean, it's a results-oriented business. Very high profile, high stakes. And the fact is, Dennis Allen's teams never made the playoffs in 3 seasons. They're not going to make it this year in his 3rd season. And they were 18-25 overall, and even got worse this year after winning their first 2 games this year in spectacular fashion. They lost 7 in a row. That's the longest losing streak the organization's had since 1999, so almost a quarter of a century. And it's surprising in some ways in that historically the New Orleans Saints have waited to the end of the season to make a coaching change. This is the first mid-season coaching change since 1980 when Dick Nolan was relieved of his job. So it's been a while, and traditionally, like I said, Gail Benson, Mickey Loomis, they play the long game and are very patient.
Well, not to mention any names. But sports columnists were doing columns saying they should change the coach.
There's no names involved in that. But it had reached the point, so it was not too surprising because of the way things had started to take place during the season. Talking to players in the locker room, there were a lot of veiled comments. You could read between the lines that there was a disconnect between the coaching staff and the players. And then the fact that the team was getting worse as the season was going on, the losses were getting more lopsided as opposed to getting closer when some of the players like Derek Carr, who had been injured, and there were certainly extenuating circumstances in that the Saints had an inordinate number of injuries, but as they started to get players back like Taysom Hill, Chris Olave, Derek Carr, they still were not competitive. And I think at that point, Gail Benson and Mickey Loomis felt the need to make this change when I know they didn't want to do it. And I should say this, according to my sources, this was a Gail Benson, Dennis Lauscha decision, business side decision. It was probably made to kind of somewhat save the rest of the season at the turnstiles, because people had really started to cut off from the Saints right now. I think their fan base is very restless.
And the fan base is also saying, what happened? I mean, we know that they were injured, but seeing those first two games, they were gangbusters, and then it's been downhill since. And then you wrote a piece about the parking lot that maybe kind of tells the tale too.
Yes, I wrote a piece the weekend before, the Carolina weekend, about the if you've been to the Saints facility in Metairie, there's a front public parking lot. Usually it's season ticket holders, reserved for the public in general. The media parks there, so do sponsors, any contractors that come out to work, just anybody that's not a staff member. Players have a gated parking lot on the side where they've always parked, holds about 170 spots. The front parking lot holds about 40. And just it's gotten worse, Marcia, and worse the last few years, with more and more players parking in this front lot. This is not an overnight development. It's been going on. There's been complaints waged by people within the building. And last week, the week before the Carolina game, each player got a memo in their locker from Gail Benson. It was not identified as Gail Benson, but that's who it came from, because she'd had a VIP sponsor come out the week before and could not find a place to park because there was too many players in the public lot. So what the point of the column was, that this was really, I think, reflective of a lack of discipline, attention to detail, and accountability with the players and the coaching staff. There was a disconnect there, and I think that manifests itself as well throughout how they studied for game planning. I think we see the attention to detail is not there on game days. The Saints make a lot of mistakes. They make a lot of mental errors. And I think it's just symptomatic of what's going on out there. And if you talk to the players, they will say that. Malvin Kamara, first thing he said, attention to detail is not there. I think that's a drop-off from when Sean Payton was here. Sean Payton, that was a hallmark of his coaching, is that he believed in everything mattered. I think I used the quote, how you do anything is how you do everything. And I think that parking lot was an example of that they weren't doing everything right.
Now, new interim head coach. What are we looking at there?
Yes, Darren Rizzi, the special teams coordinator, has been here a long time, so he's very familiar with the operations, about 7 years here. He's a Jersey guy, kind of a guy's guy, player's coach. You can pick that up, that accent. He's from Bergen. And I think he's got a legitimate shot here during this 8-game audition to become the Saints' next head coach. He'd be the 12th head coach in the franchise history. He's got his work cut out for him. The Saints are missing their top 2 receivers now to injuries. They're missing their top 2 cornerbacks. So they're going to be hamstrung a little bit. But you can already see he's got enthusiasm and energy. He's kind of the anti-Dennis Allen in that regard. His personality is much more upbeat. And I think that's what this team needs right now. I think there's going to be a bump from him among the players. I think there's going to be more enthusiasm. I've seen it in practice. Now, can he win? Because ultimately, it's a game of wins and losses, and I think we're going to find out. But I do think he's a legitimate candidate.
All right. E, did you have something you wanted to ask? E?
Well, yeah. Have there been? I'm sure there have been studies about injuries to teams that play on artificial turfs. Is there any proof that those teams are more prone to injuries because they're on a hard turf?
Well, no, there's definitely evidence that artificial turf creates more injuries. There's no question about that. Now the league is mandated now that every artificial turf stadium uses the exact same turf. So there's a basically a baseline there for everyone to be on the same surface. I think one of the problems the Saints have had is their artificial turf in their indoor facilities somewhat old. It's 4 years old, and a lot of these injuries the Saints have suffered have been in practice at their own facility. So Darren Rizzi, the new interim coach, has changed up the practice regimen, and he's actually installed a new activation period where they're almost warming up before practice. They did that to some degree before, but he's changed it up, and it's more extensive to try and prevent some of these soft tissue injuries. But it's a mess right now with the Saints, along with their sister organization, the Pelicans. A lot of injuries right now. Frustrating for the fans.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see where it goes. It is certainly frustrating, and I know it's frustrating for them too. All right. Thanks a lot, Jeff. Okay, Don. Infrastructure improvements. I mean, people have to be working really like crazy. Super Bowl's right around the corner.
Super Bowl's less than 100 days away. The question I asked with all of the improvements that are happening for Super Bowl is it appears from an outsider's or insider's perspective, really, that we're polishing the silver for the guests.
Yeah.
What's going to be left behind for us after the guests leave? That was the question I asked. And they said that Michael Hecht, who's overseeing all of the repairs that are underway, said there are really 3 goals for what they're doing. The first is to fix up for Super Bowl and to polish the silver. The second is to make sure that the improvements that are being made last a decade, so that they are here for those of us who live in the region. And the third is to audition for the next Super Bowl or the next Taylor Swift or the next convention or just the visitor who comes who's never been before. So to make sure they make a lasting impression. It's more than 600 individual projects that are underway. Everything from the light project on the Crescent City connection that everybody's talking about, to repaving Poydras Street, to fixing a single cracked sidewalk. So it's a large scale of projects, some tiny, some huge. They're all coordinated between city, state, private, nonprofit, for-profit. For-profit, you're talking about people like Verizon and Cox, who have been testing and working with the internet connectivity. Michael Hecht said that Taylor Swift was a huge help for things like that because they had 65,000 people in the Superdome 3 nights in a row. Could the internet work and survive those 3 shows? And it did. So those kind of tests are happening. One of the biggest areas, obviously, that's being cleaned up is the French Quarter, and the cleanup there includes 26 blocks of the city being resurfaced, city streets being resurfaced, $2 million in new lighting in the French Quarter, new signage, concrete and paved sidewalks getting repairs, and a big crackdown on illegal vending, both there and in other areas of the entertainment district, a homeless abatement, helping rehouse the homeless people who hang out in the French Quarter. There is a new garbage contract in the French Quarter as well with Henry Consulting, which is a Troy Henry company. I'm told that the French Quarter will look, feel, and smell better. Again, Taylor Swift gave us a good glimpse at what that could be when you see Bourbon Street full of people singing instead of some of the other things we sometimes see on Bourbon Street. And Michael Hecht said the level of teamwork they're seeing is kind of really unprecedented. More than 24 organizations, city, state, quasi, city, state, federal, nonprofit, for-profit, are meeting together for tabletop discussions weekly and really coordinating efforts here. And they want to hear from all of us, too. So if you see infrastructure that needs to be improved, you can send an email. We're going to flash it up on the screen. The email goes to superbowl@gnoinc.org. If there's a pothole in the entertainment district that you're aware of that isn't being repaired, or a light out, or you have an idea, this is not a whole citywide, please send us your ideas, but really focused more on the entertainment district, the CBD, the Warehouse District, the French Quarter, the Marigny, where the visitors will be. And they're hoping that's a way to get word to them and get things repaired and fixed before February 5th.
And it's all going to get done on time?
Supposedly. I mean, the street repairs are really not fun for those of us who drive through them, but they're all supposed to be up and operational when the big game kicks off.
All right. Good luck with it all. Huh? All right, Don. Thanks a lot. Okay, Eve, our Louisiana legislature is in special session right now taking a look at the state's tax structure with a lot of changes being proposed.
Yeah, they went into session on the 6th, which was the day after the election. And a lot of the legislators might have said, oh, man, I'm up late all night. I go to legislative session. And I don't know if a lot of people noticed it. Well, in the news, but an important session. It could be a very, very important session. And the governor addressed them, and he said, you know, we got to really fix things. We need a better tax program. So some of the keys to it that we've been hearing is one is to eliminate the income tax. Well, that's good. I think most people have. But replace it with a flat tax like around 3%.
So there would still be an income tax, but just a flat tax. Right?
Yeah. Okay. To increase the sales tax, and which is always kind of a standard thing. But part of the issue that goes with that is also to get rid of some of the tax subsidies. There's a lot of tax subsidies out there. That's going to be the big issue because there are some people don't care about, but one people care about a lot is the movie industry. And we've done this before. We've gotten rid of that and we brought it back. And the argument always is, okay, well, if you eliminate the subsidy, then we're not going to have this business, but the business creates a lot of jobs. That's what you always hear about the movie industry. But other people claim it really it doesn't make as much income as people think it does. I mean, it brings in some income, it brings in a lot of attention, but we need to see where it's going to go. But I think that's going to be a key issue. So the governor has his plan. It's a very complicated plan. The session is like 18 days, and just got to see where he goes.
Yeah, some things are moving out of committee, and you just sort of have to pay attention to see what's going on there. The governor is proposing extending that it's about a half-cent sales tax that had been put in place during the Edwards term to get us out of the budget
Which they
hole.
did. It was like, it was kind of like a transitional sort of tax, and they might have to question whether or
extend
not
that.
that's going to stay.
Yeah, to plug in the budget hole. I mean, if we go to just a flat tax, not as much tax, income tax will be coming into the state coffers. So we'll see where it goes. It's definitely going to be a lot of controversy and a lot of discussion going on in Baton Rouge right now for us to really pay close attention to, because it's going to hit us in the pocketbook, one way or the other. Absolutely. Hopefully for good. Okay, over to you, E, to wrap us up. Other stories.
Well, we're talking about the House of Representatives race and the count that's going on. As of this afternoon, it was 211 Republicans who were elected so far. The number has to be 218. And so it's hovering around there. Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, seems fairly optimistic in his comments. But there's just waiting for that final count. And yeah, it is those western districts that are holding it up.
Okay. All right, Don, over to you.
Another of Governor Landry's ideas you will see on the sidelines at Tiger Stadium this week when a live tiger returns to Tiger Stadium. There's been controversy on both sides.
But it's not Mike.
It is not Mike. It is a different tiger who apparently is happy around people. That was the quote from today.
So why do we have to have a tiger?
Ask Governor
At the
Landry.
stadium.
I don't know.
Okay. All righty. Jeff, over to you.
Mark your planners, November 22nd, Friday coming up. It's a big day in the local sports calendar. Not only is it the opening day of the Fairgrounds race meet for the winter, 153rd race meet. We have Ken McPeak and Brian Hernandez, the jockey, coming in, who won the Kentucky Derby and Kentucky Oaks last year, will be a part of this meet, so that's exciting. But also the same day, the Greater New Orleans Sports Foundation's having their annual banquet at the Superdome, on the floor of the Superdome, where they will recognize Tom and Gail Benson for the Hall of Fame, and NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell is coming in to present that.
Very good. All right, Jeff, thanks. Robert, over to
Okay,
you.
so my contacts that practice law down at the federal courthouse tell me that the investigation of the mayor, which has been dragging on ad nauseum forever, it's going to have to come to a conclusion if, and it's a big if there's going to be an indictment of the mayor by the end of December, because what's going to happen once we get into January, you have a new president, which means you're going to get a new U.S. attorney, which means you're going to have a new decision maker. So, and then it'll probably just kick down the can. The can will be kicked down the road for a very long time.
Okay.
So we just don't know.
We don't know. We shall see. Thanks a lot, guys, for being here. Thank you all for joining us. See you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.